Hey you guys, what is up and welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin if you're new, and welcome to my annual reading recap video. I'm kind of ashamed, but not really, just saying that I only read 9 books this past year, but in all honesty it was one of my most living my life years I think I've ever had. I moved out of my parents' house. I moved in with Nick, my now fiance. We spent a lot of time decorating our apartment. We traveled so much. We traveled to Europe for 2 weeks. We got engaged. We also went to Austin, San Diego, the Poconos, Charleston. I went to LA for work, so it was really busy. And then of course I got into wedding planning, so I'm not really ashamed to say that I only read 9 books, but you guys should stay here and continue watching this video because one, I feel like some of the books I read were pretty obscure and they could be recommendations for you if you are looking for different books to read that aren't just Colleen Hoover and Taylor Jenkins Reid and Divine Rivals and those really mainstream books. I read some different books here, so you might be interested in those. I also have some hot takes, especially on the one Colleen Hoover book that I read, so you're gonna want to stick around for that because if you know one thing about my channel, it's that we are always open, honest, and real here. So grab yourself a hot beverage, a popcorn, a snack, anything really. Sit back and relax and let's talk all things reading. So I have some notes on my phone here because I wanted to remember key details, so if you see me look down, that's why. So the first book that I read of the year was Night Shift by Robin Cook, and it was my first ever medical thriller that I've read. Essentially the plot was really interesting, fairly high stakes, but I felt like the main character, Jack, just really fell flat for me. He wasn't an interesting character at all, and he was kind of annoying. But essentially the story follows the case of a top physician at a hospital being murdered, and then there are subsequent killings. And Jack, he is, I believe, I might get his job title wrong, but he is he's a pathologist, I think. I think that's what he does. So he is involved in that side of the work. And he, being at this hospital, his wife is also there, and she, I forget exactly what she does, but she's higher up as well. And so these people start disappearing, they start getting murdered, and Jack gets a little bit too interested in the story, and he starts taking things into his own hands and tries to uncover the mystery of who is doing the killings. And at the end there's a pretty big twist. It's from someone that you really don't expect, you don't see it coming, and overall it's a pretty good book. Like I said, I feel like I wanted a little bit more from the protagonist, a little bit more character development, but it was a decent book, and overall I would recommend it. The second book I read was probably my favorite book of the entire year, and that was Mad Honey by Jodi Picoult. And this book was insane. The twist is kind of similar to Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, so if you like that kind of a twist, this was similar in a way. So I would recommend, if you were a fan of Evelyn Hugo, you should read this book, because I also feel like the writing style is kind of similar. It's a little bit more elevated, I think, than Taylor Jenkins Reid. I love Taylor Jenkins Reid writing style. Honestly, if I could write as good as Taylor Jenkins Reid, I would kill for that. But I feel like this writing style was a little more elevated in the terms of the metaphor that Jodi Picoult does. But essentially this story follows a couple different characters, and it tells their backstories. It tells the story of Lily, the new girl who moves to this small town, and then it tells the story of Asher, this kind of troubled, angsty teen, and it also tells the story of Asher's mother. And Asher and Lily have this wonderful romance, but then one day Lily is found dead, and a lot of people think it's Asher that did it because right before she passed away they had a big fight, and the novel just digs into their backstories as well as Asher's mother's backstory, and we kind of see the motivation for how Asher became the way he is as a character, and you get very connected with all of these characters. You empathize with them a lot because the backstory is so deep and so good, and the twists are crazy. There's little twists and there's big twists, and the story is just so good. It's so well written. I love the characters. It's definitely my #1 book of the year. The next book I read was The Villa by Rachel Hawkins. I really like that book. that she wrote. It was kind of like a Jane Eyre spoof. I forget what the name of it was, but I liked that one a lot by her. But this one, The Villa, felt pretty flat for me. I wanted to read it because, as I mentioned, I went to Positano this year, and the story is set in Positano. So this writer is meeting up with her other writer friend. They've been friends since high school, and they have, you know, an interesting girl dynamic past. We've all been there, right? Have those friends that aren't really your friends. So they go out to this villa in Positano to kind of work on their writing careers, and while the main character is there, she finds a lot of disturbing information about what happened at this villa. So the story switches to the perspective of this like rock band who stayed there, and some crazy things happened. And so the story is like the main character is writing and reading and researching about this rock band situation, and there's like girl trouble with her and the other girl. And, you know, it explores complicated female friendships, which I like. I always love to read about a good complicated female friendship because I've just been there way too many times myself. But overall, the story was slow moving. I don't really like the technique of whenever authors kind of interject authors into the story and then they're like writing about something and that's part of the story. I just am not a big fan of that dynamic. I feel like it just kind of falls flat and slow for me. And I think inherently all the books I've ever read about Positano, like Positano, you got to make the story interesting. I think everyone thinks Positano, it's such a fun, like cool concept. It's such a unique place, like that the story will automatically be interesting because it's in Positano. That is not true. Like Positano can't carry the whole story, you know? And then I read Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. And I've read 2 other Colleen Hoover books. I read Verity, which I really liked, although I thought it was corny. I liked the book. I read It Ends With Us, which I thought was really corny, but I thought it had a good message. Didn't hate it. Ugly Love, though, it just might have turned me off of Colleen Hoover books forever. I thought this book was simply dreadful. There was really no plot at all. The main character falls in love with this airline pilot conveniently named Miles, and the way they fall in love is just so unbelievable. And the whole story is just like these characters exploring their feelings for each other. There really is no plot, so it was just so boring. I thought the writing was weak. I thought it was amateurish, and much like Colleen Hoover's other books, overly sexual. Not my thing. I'm here for a plot, you know? I know. That's an unpopular opinion. Who's here for the plot anymore? Very few people. Who's here for the writing style? Basically no one. So for me, I don't know. I just did not care for this book, and it will be a long time before I try another Colleen Hoover book again. The next book I read was A Flicker in the Dark. It was an interesting thriller. I read this one really quickly. Chloe is this woman who her father was a serial killer back in the day, and Chloe was unfortunately involved in the process of turning her father in. And so of course she has lots and lots of trauma from this, and she falls in love with this man named Daniel who's seemingly perfect, and then he isn't perfect, and there are new mysterious killings that are happening in her town, very similar to the killings that her father was involved in. So of course Chloe, you know, she's on the case. She feels really bad, and she feels like she could have prevented her father from doing this, you know, years ago, because she saw him in the backyard with a shovel, and she didn't do anything about it at first. You know, there wasn't concrete evidence and stuff like that. So she feels really, really compelled now to stop what's happening now from, you know, being a repeat of the past history. So the story it's juicy, it's a little gruesome, so you know, it's a true thriller. If you don't like thrillers, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I thought it was good, and I definitely liked it. It was one of the stronger books I read this year. Then I read Hang the Moon, and the book was really voicey, and I loved like the description of Sally, the protagonist, and Duke, her father. But like the story was just, I don't know why I keep reading books about like bootlegging, moonshining business situation in the back roads of like West Virginia or Virginia, because I read a similar book to that, you know, a year ago, and it's just, the story's about, you know, complicated family dynamics, kind of coming of age, and this whole illegal moonshine business that this girl's family runs, and how they accumulated their wealth. I will say Sally is like a really strong, independent woman character, so like props to the author for really creating her as such an exceptionally strong character. I liked that aspect of the book, but overall I just feel like the topic wasn't super interesting to me, and I wanted like something different than the thrillers and the romances. I wanted something a little bit more, I don't know, just different. So I think that's kind of why I gravitated towards the story, but overall it just like didn't hold my interest, and it was pretty slow moving. The next book I read was Behind Closed Doors. I love this book. It was probably my second favorite story of the year. It was a great thriller, really fast paced. The main character gets into this seemingly perfect relationship with this man named Jack. He's very successful. He is a lawyer for battered women. But whenever the main character gets married, Jack kind of turns, and it turns out he's this very sick man, and he abuses the main character. He doesn't let her have any of her own money. He doesn't let her see the outside world except whenever he's there accompanying her. He just is a monster behind closed doors. And the story is counting down until the protagonist's younger sister, Millie, who has maybe Down syndrome, I don't know, I don't exactly remember, maybe autism, something like that. And she's just a very sweet, innocent girl. And Jack is planning on having himself and his wife take custody of Millie, and she's gonna come live with them, and then he's gonna abuse and like torture her as well. So the main character has to figure out how to stop this from happening, and that's, you know, what we see throughout the course of the book. And the genius of her and her sister Millie, you know, who was thought of as slow and dumb and whatever, but Millie is actually really smart, which, you know, it makes you really love her and root for her as a character. So it's very high stakes, it's very emotional, and it's a really good book. I would definitely recommend it. I give it like 4.5 stars out of 5. Then I read The Last Housewife, and I had high hopes for this one, but it was just weird. It was kind of similar to like, it wasn't, I mean, it's not one for one, but it's like you can kind of see inspiration, I feel like, from Handmaid's Tale in it. And I think it is interesting because, again, it's like this whole concept of like this dystopia where women are going back to being like slaves for men and doing everything for them, and just like men owning and controlling women, and women having like no identity. The story follows these 3 girls who wind up getting preyed on by this older man professor at their school, and he kind of grooms them and shows affection for them. He's like a father to them at first, but then he gets romantically involved with them, which is like so weird. And these girls like go off campus and live at his mansion, and then slowly this man imprints his philosophy on these girls, you know, telling them that, you know, they're better off wearing these like long pilgrim-like dresses and submitting to men and being these housewives in like super traditional, weird, old-fashioned ways. And, you know, the girls fall for it. They really do. But then the one girl like kind of figures out this isn't like what she wanted for her life, and she attempts to run away, and she gets murdered. And then eventually the two other girls break free, and we flash forward to the present, and the one main girl you know, begins to notice sort of like similar things happening, where there are like these disappearances from this college that she went to, and like she's kind of wondering, like, is this happening again? And she's kind of finding herself like sickeningly attracted to this man, and she like kind of wants to get back into this society, and so she like uncovers the society again. And it's like a lot of darkness about how this incident affected this main character, and how she kind of like wants to stop it, but she's like still attracted to it. So it's just like this whole big thing, and it's interesting in a lot of different ways, but overall I didn't like it. I didn't really like how gruesome it was at times. Like, that aspect of it wasn't for me, and I just also feel like I couldn't relate to the protagonist, like, liking this and like wanting this, and I don't know, it was a complicated story, but like overall I really wasn't into it. Then I read The Midnight Library, but actually I didn't. I got about halfway through and then I stopped reading it because my old iPad, which I read on, stopped working, and then I got a new iPad, and I just never had it in me to finish Midnight Library because the book was hella boring, honestly. I liked it at first. I thought it was voicey, kind of reminded me of John Green, but I don't know, it's just too much like philosophy of life versus action and plot. Like, I feel like me as a writer, I tend to do this too. Like, I really like exploring the themes, and I like the theme of the story where it's like you don't know which life is right for you, so you're like trying on these different lives in the Midnight Library. So like, I liked that theme, and I like just exploring a good heavier theme in general, like myself as a writer and a reader. But like, that only goes so far. It doesn't hold the interest of readers, and it's really not advisable. So I feel like the novel was just like too preachy about the theme and like exploring the lives, and just it wasn't just like enough action or enough depth to the character to be interesting. So it was a DNF for me. I probably would have forced myself to finish it if the whole iPad situation hadn't happened, but I kind of took it as a sign to, okay, move on to a different book. Then I read an interesting book, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, Matthew Perry's autobiography. Of course, Matthew Perry sadly passed away, and there was just like a lot of stuff about him online. He seemed like a really great guy, and so I was kind of interested in him as a person, and so I decided to read his autobiography, which was so eye-opening. I feel like every single person should read his autobiography, honestly. It's very eye-opening about addiction, and I think as people who aren't addicted, like, I'm not a person that has an addiction, you know, anybody that's not addicted to something, I don't think they understand like the severity of addiction, how addiction is like not a choice. And I think he does a great job of explaining that in his book. Like, he spent millions of dollars in rehabs. He was a great looking guy. He was a star in one of the most popular TV shows of all time. He dated actresses, you know, he had tons of money. He seemingly had it all going for him on paper, but this addiction ruined his life and he couldn't get out of it, no matter how hard he tried. So it really wasn't a choice. It was like this illness that he was facing, and he just really goes into the detail of how you know, messed up he got from drinking alcohol, and how he just couldn't stop. He got addicted to pain pills, the whole 9 yards. And it's just really sad, and I think everyone should read this story because I think people should know that, like, you know, addiction isn't really a choice. It's this horrible disease, and it makes me sad to think that, like, this guy obviously had all the money in the world and he still couldn't help himself, and there's a lot of people out there that have way less money, so, you know, the chances of them getting help is even slimmer. So it's crazy. It's a sad book, and the ending of the story was so optimistic. It seemed like he was, you know, in a good place, and then of course he passes away, like, you know, about a year later after this book came out. So it was crazy. But those were the books that I read this year. Let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. Don't come for me in the comments if you disagree with some of my opinions. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, and I will say, like, you know, the books I didn't really care for, no shade to the authors or to anyone that likes those books, they just weren't for me, and I just kind of try to be funny with my delivery of my opinions. So no hate, only love. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.